Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mir Hashem Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, or at least completing Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. We began it already yesterday. We begin today in the middle of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph with a new Siman, Siman Taf Kuf Nun, Hevdol Sheyesh Bein Tisha B'Av L'Yeser Tzimos. Some of the differences that exist in halacha between Tisha B'Av and the other three primary fast days that we have been discussing, namely Asar B'Tevis, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and Tzom Gedalia. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Hakol Chayavim L'His Anois Arba Tzimos Halalu. Every member of Klal Yisrael is obligated, they're chayiv, to fast these 4 fast days, Va'asar Lifroitz Gader, and it is forbidden for somebody to be Paritz Geder. Literally speaking, Paritz Geder means to breach the fence. We have to remember these fast days are Dinei D'Rabbanan, and we know that the Gzeros and the Takanos that the Chachamim made, we treat them as a fence, like the Mishnah in Ovid says, Va'asu Syag L'Torah. The Chachamim have to make a syag, they have to make a fence and a boundary to protect the Torah. So these are Dinei D'Rabbanan, and what the halach is telling us is Asar Lifroitz Gader. You're not allowed to breach the fence of the takanos, the decrees that the Chachamim passed, and these fasts are Dinei D'Rabbanan, they come from the Nevi'im. Now, before we even turn to the Mishnah Berurah, I would read to you the Bir Halacha, Dibra Maschel Hakol Chayavim, says the Chavetz Chaim, Tinoikis Bashtei Mesrei Shanim V'Yom Echad, a young lady, the age of 12 months and a day, V'Tinoik Ben Shloish Esrei Shana, a young man, the age of 13 V'Yom Echad and 1 day, Chayavim L'His Anois, they are obligated to fast these fast days, V'Loi Kodim L'Chein, strictly speaking, they are not obligated to fast any earlier than that. So, when the Shulchan Aruch says Hakol Chayavim L'His Anois, everyone is obligated to fast. Every adult is obligated to fast. Women are certainly included in the obligation to fast. In some communities, it seems to be widely accepted to treat the idea of women fasting in a very lenient fashion. We don't find that here in Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut Aleph, Va'asar Lifroitz Gader. Ritzon Lamar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Afal Gav de Maskinan B'Gemara. Even though the maskana of the sugya that discusses these fast days in Rosh Hashanah Yud Ches Amud Aleph is the Bizman de'ein matzui gzeros ovdei kechavim al Yisrael, in days when we're not experiencing harsh decrees at the hands of the non-Jews, Tali Adavar B'Ritzayin Yisrael, then these fast days sort of become optional. It's up to the will of the people whether or not they want to continue these fast days or not. Dahainu, so that Imratzu Rov Yisrael, if the majority of Klal Yisrael wishes, V'Hiskimu, and they agree, Shaloi L'Hisanois Ba'Shloisha Tzimos, not to fast the 3 fasts of Tzom Gedalia, Asar B'Tevis, and Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Harishus B'Yadan, they have the permission and the option to exercise that will. They can decide that we want to abolish those 3 fasts. So if you live in a day and age where the non-Jewish governments seem to be treating the Yidden with respect and not placing any sort of harsh decrees on them, then it would seem from the Gemara that these 3 fasts at least become somewhat optional. Still in all, Kasra Paiskim, the Paiskim write to Achshav that nowadays, Kvar Rotzu v'Kiblu Alein Klal Yisrael Midar Dar, Klal Yisrael has already accepted upon themselves the continuation of these 3 fast days throughout the generations, and Va'asar Lifroitz Gader, and therefore we may not be Paritz Geder, we have to keep these fasts. Says the Ramah, Haga, Mihu, as much as the Mechaber has said, Hakol Chayavim L'His Anois, that everyone is obligated to fast, says the Ramah, Mihu, nevertheless, Ubarois Umenikos, women who are expecting and women that are nursing, Shemitztarois Harbe, if it causes them great suffering for them to fast, Ein L'His Anois, they should not fast. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Bays, Mihu, as we just said, these fast days are Dinei D'Rabbanan, and they were left somewhat optional to the later generations of Klal Yisrael. Says the Chavetz Chaim, "De b'shasha ratzu v'kiblu alei lehisanos." At the time that they accepted these fast days upon themselves, heikelu lechatchila aleihen. They at that time they already were more lenient on the expectant women and the nursing women, so that it's not that they have an obligation and now they don't have to honor that obligation because they're suffering. It's more that the obligation was never placed upon them. When these fast days were decreed, they weren't really included in the decree. Ais Katan Gimel, Ubarais Umenikais, women that are expecting, women that are nursing. Says the Chavetz Chaim Umistabra, it would seem sensible to say, the Uberes Mikri Mishasha Hukar Avlad. What woman do we call expectant? At what point in the pregnancy do we recognize a woman as being an expectant woman who does not have to fast? Says the Chavetz Chaim, it would seem to make sense to say, Misha Shehukar Havlad, when a woman reaches the point in her pregnancy where she's physically recognizably expectant, which the Gemara always says is 3 months. So at the end of the first trimester, she's already considered expectant in the context of this halacha, which is the same halacha that we find in the context of Hilchas Nida. At what point can a woman no longer keep her vestais that she had before she became expectant? Once she hits the 3-month mark of her pregnancy, she's already considered to be expecting and to be mesulekes midamim. We don't expect her to experience any kind of menstrual bleeding anymore for the duration of her pregnancy. Nevertheless, after dafilu lachar abam yom litziras havlad nami havi lo b'chlal uberes l'inyin zeh im margeshes tsar. The Chavetz Chaim says it is very possible that even 40 days from the time of conception, we would already consider a woman expectant in the context of fasting if she is suffering. But if it's less than 40 days, then the Chavetz Chaim says she should be treated like any other woman, unless she is indeed suffering greatly. There are women who do suffer greatly in the very beginning of their pregnancy. If she's feeling a weakness, then certainly we should not be stringent upon her at all, and she should not fast. The language of the Ramah was that an expectant woman or a nursing woman who is suffering, says the Mishnah Berurah, certainly this also applies to anyone, man or woman, who is ill, even if they're a chayla she'ein by sakana. Somebody has strep throat. It's not really considered a sakana, so you have somebody who's a chayla she'ein by sakana. A chayla she'ein by sakana, bevadai pater milihisanos, is certainly exempt from having to fast. V'asar loy lahachmer al atzmai, and it would be forbidden for him to be machmer on himself and to fast when he is not required to fast. If you take a look in the Dirshu footnote number 5, it brings down here a very interesting halacha from the Steichemet. Va'afim b'tchilas hatzaim eina mitzte'eres. Even if you'll have, let's say, somebody who's a chayla she'ein by sakana, and in the beginning of the fast, it's no big deal. So okay, so he skipped breakfast. So va'afim b'tchilas hatzaim eina mitzte'eres. Even if it's the case where at the beginning of the fast he's really not suffering, ach masheres, but he can estimate that should he attempt to fast the entire fast, he will become bitzar, he will suffer. Kasav Asteichemet, the Steichemet right, shemuteres lechol miyad, he can eat right away. He doesn't have to wait until he's going to suffer. If you have a chayla she'ein by sakana, who realizes that if he tries to fast the entire day, eventually he's going to suffer from it, he's not mechuyev to fast at all. Footnote number 6, on the 3 fasts of Tzom Gedalia, Asar B'Tevis, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, if we say that somebody is a chayla and they have to eat, we know that on Yom Kippur, when somebody is not well and has to eat, we tell them to eat pachas mikashir. They should eat a tiny amount at a time, less than an amount which is considered an act of achila, and they should space out their eating so that each act of eating is more than a kedei achilas pras apart from the next act of eating, so that the amounts that they eat do not combine to make up an amount that is considered an achila. Do we have that halacha by these 3 fasts? Das again remnisid karelitz, Since what we learned over here is that when Klal Yisrael accepted these fasts upon themselves, they didn't accept the fast on an expectant woman, on a nursing woman, or on a chayla she'ein by sakana, so then they don't have a chiyuv to fast at all. Like we're going to see, the Shulchan Aruch is going to use a lashon later on in Tisha B'Av, when it comes to Tisha B'Av, shebemakam chayli lo gazru rabbanan, that the Chazal never want to sacken the fast on an ill individual. Therefore, so therefore, by these fasts, there is no requirement to try and eat pachas mikashir, because the chaylish ein by sakana, or the mu'uberes, or the meinekes, are not considered obligated to fast at all. It's not like Yom Kippur where you have a chiyuv to fast, but now you have a ptur, you have an exemption which allows you to eat, even though, despite the fact that you have an obligation to fast, these individuals on these fasts don't have a chiyuv to fast. So there's no reason to eat pachas mikashir. So they can eat even more than they strictly speaking need to eat. They don't have to be meshayar, okay, how much do I have to eat? No, they can eat, they can sit down and eat a meal. When we come up, nevertheless, they shouldn't sit down and eat a delicious Danish and make themselves a delicious omelet for breakfast. That they shouldn't do. Because on these fasts, which have to do with the mourning over the Churban Bayis, they should be imay anochi b'tzara, they should be part of the tzibur as far as having avelus over the Churban. So they definitely shouldn't sit down and eat a delicious meal, but they can eat even more than what they strictly speaking need to eat. Mishnah Berurah lahalon. He says here, if you take a look at what the Bir Halacha writes, even on Tisha B'Av, you don't have to try to eat pachas mikashir. V'hamate Ephraim kasav, the Mate Ephraim writes, shemisha al pi haras haroifei einoi misane, somebody who, based on the recommendations or the decision of a doctor, he was told by a doctor that he cannot fast, yochal b'tzina, he should at least eat b'tzina. He should eat discreetly. He shouldn't sit down by a restaurant and eat in public. He should go into his kitchen. He should close the window shade and he should eat if he has to eat. Okay. All right. We'll stop in the footnote over there. Let's go weiter in the Ramah. So far the Ramah said over here, Ubarais and Menikois Shemitstaris Harbe, an expectant woman or a nursing woman who is suffering greatly, ein lehis anois, does not need to fast. Continues the Ramah and says, Va'afila einon mitztaros, even if they're not really suffering, einon mechuyavos lehis anois, they are really not obligated to fast. Ela shenagu lahachmir, but there is a minig that if they're not suffering, so then al pi minig they should fast. V'dafka b'shloishet tzomos. This halacha only applies to the three fasts of Tzom Gedalia, Asar B'Teves, and Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Aval b'Tisha B'Av mechuyavos lahashlim, but on Tisha B'Av they are required to fast unless they are suffering. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Hey l'Shanagu lahachmir, v'em heim chalushos, if they are weak, nira de'en lehem lahachmir, then they should not be machmir. When we come makom, nevertheless, afatzarich lecha, even somebody who does need to eat, layisanig atzmai b'basar v'yayin, they should sit down and have meat and wine. Rak if mashatzarich, that he should eat what they're required to eat. V'chein aktanim sheish lehem das l'hisabel. So too, a minor child, somebody, a girl who's less than 12 years in a day, or a boy who's less than 13 years in a day. So let's say a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, somebody who's old enough to really understand that there's a concept of mourning over the Churban, even though you don't have an obligation to be mechanech them in the requirement of fasting, even a 12-year-old, there's no obligation to give chinuch to a 12-year-old boy to go and fast. Nevertheless, it is proper to teach them they should sit down, they should eat bread, they should have water, or just some simple food. Kid comes and he wants to eat on a fast day. He's entitled to eat. He says, I want breakfast. Okay, take a bowl of Cheerios. But don't expect me to go make you eggs and give you bagels and lox. Well, it should be a Michael Pashut, Lifiatinoik. in accordance with the normal way that this child is treated. I don't think if you try to give an American child now, you try to tell him to have bread and water, that's not going to go over very well. But if you tell him today for breakfast you should have some cold cereal, that is a reasonable expectation. Now we go to Sif Beis, says the Mechaber. Tzaimayis halalu, these three fasts, chutz mi Tisha B'Av, the exception of Tisha B'Av, mutarim berechitza v'sicha u'ni'ilos hasandal v'tashmish hamita. On these three fast days, it is permissible to wash and to bathe. It is permissible to anoint oneself with different types of creams, oils, etc. U'ni'ilos hasandal, you could wear a normal leather shoe. The tashmish hamita, and marital relations, strictly speaking, all of these things are mutter on the other three fast days. And also these fast days start in the morning. They don't start the night before. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut vav back on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. Mutar berchitza, it's permissible for one to bathe. To b'shasha ratzu v'kibla aleim lotzim b'chol arba'tanya sanal. When these 4 fast days were accepted, like kibla aleim shiyu b'chaymer tanis tzibur k'tisha b'av, they did not accept the other 3 tanesim with the full chaymer adavar, the full strictness of a normal tanis tzibur, with the exception of Tisha B'Av, levi she'ein raivat tzibur yichayla lamed ba, because they felt that this would not be a decree that most of the tzibur would find something that they can do. However, the Mishnah Berurah does bring down Ubal nefesh yachmer b'kulan kamay b'Tisha B'Av. A bal nefesh, somebody who cares about his nefesh, somebody who's concerned about his nefesh, about the spiritual aspect of his life, he should be machmer, he should be stringent with all of these things, just like on Tisha B'Av. Ella she'im cholel tefillah yikayim einasai. If it falls out on the night that his wife is going to the mikveh, then he's permitted to have marital relations, to be mekayim his chiyav of einah on the night that she goes to the mikveh. And also one should not be stringent, even about nefesh, should not be stringent on the other 3 tanesim when it comes to wearing something other than a normal shoe, because that's something that's public and somebody's going to look at it, it's going to become a joke. And if Asar B'Tevis falls out on Erev Shabbos, you should not be machber and say, I'm not going to take a hot shower because it's Asar B'Tevis. No, if Asar B'Tevis is Erev Shabbos, the way it was this year, you still should take a hot shower l'chvayt Shabbos. The tinus does not start the night before, as does Tisha B'Av. Rather, you're allowed to eat and you're allowed to drink even at night. There was something else here that I wanted to mention from the Dirshu footnotes. Where is it? There's a long footnote here, footnote number 9, where he discusses what happens if a woman who's nursing is not suffering from the tinus, but what she is worried about is that her baby may not have a sufficient milk supply. And they bring down over here from Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, I think it was, Shekol sheyesh chashash yismart lahachalav ekev hatzayim. If a woman is concerned that her milk supply will run out and she will not have milk to nurse her baby because she's fasting, or even if she's going to have an adequate supply of milk, but she senses that the milk is going to be somewhat changed, tishdemiyad, she should drink immediately. And this is true even if you have Similac, even if you have formula that you could give the baby. If the woman senses that her milk supply is going to be changed in any way at all, she should immediately drink on the fast. Because the main source of food for the baby is mommy's milk. And therefore, if mommy's milk is going to be impinged in any way, the woman should right away drink. Even if she's not suffering and she doesn't feel any weakness at all. Just the baby is going to be mitzar because the baby is not going to have milk, or there's going to be something off with the baby's milk. Then she should not fast. Olamaisa hayagan Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Moire. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal used to paskin shebiz manenu shebederach klal atainis geremes chulsha. In our days, when it is fairly widespread that a tinus does cause weakness, or it will cause other kinds of issues. A nursing mother does not have to fast. Definitely in the early months after the Leda, she should not be stringent, she should not fast at all. Yeah. Okay. All right, I think we're going to stop over here for today. A little bit of a shorter share than usual. Me'ez Hashem, we'll pick up tomorrow in Chav Gimel Amud Beis with Sif Gimel. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Schus of limud HaTorah should be Megan and Gans Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Hashem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnasa to all those in need. And we should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen.